So I want to welcome you to the second lecture of this graduation. We'll focus on living history. I got the idea when we had the fashion shows where I had 5 different people with 5 different countries, and we talked about Christmas in Denmark, Christmas in Norway and Sweden, and people were so interested and they asked so many questions. So last year something really bright happened to me. I thought, let us have another thing of those, but about people of this series will be one of my compatriots, Fritse Hakkinen, who is from Odense, Denmark, and that's also where Hans Christian Andersen grew up. And this is the 3rd biggest city in Denmark, in case you didn't know. Fritse always wanted to become a nurse and started her studies at the International People's College right next to Hamlet's Castle in Elsinore. While there she met her future husband, Fritse Hakkinen, who is of Finnish descent and who is from Alaska of all things. Fritse then went to Odense to begin to study to become a nurse, and her husband went to Aarhus University to study medicine, and their romance bloomed and grew, and they married in Denmark, and they came back to the States and settled in Oregon. And Fritse went to Lewis and Clark College and studied pre-nursing. And Fritse has been a public health nurse and coordinator in prenatal coordinator, and she has been involved in. But however, the last years she has spent as a hospice nurse. She is now semi-retired, and she enjoys her grandchildren and her big dogs. But I have to tell you that 3 years ago, feast, we had a dinner and auction, and the little puppy was and who bit on the puppy and got it? That was Fritse, and I bet that dog is really big now.
Yes, he is. But I don't have him.
You don't have him anymore?
No, we bought him for our son and daughter-in-law.
Oh my goodness.
Other way around, for our daughter and son-in-law.
Okay, well the rest of the story you'll get from Fritse, who will enlighten you with her presentation growing up in Denmark. Actually, from a personal point of view, I would say if you had to grow up any place, let it be Denmark. So let us welcome Fritse.
Well, thank you, Åse. I was just going to say, I think I can sit down again, though. You just gave
the whole thing, you mean?
Yeah, that was about it. No, it was a wonderful place to grow up. I am very, very happy to have grown up in Denmark and lived there until I was 19. Odense, which is a town where Hans Christian Andersen was born. About 100,000 people, very, very pretty, just with a river running through it, and just a nice-sized town where you could just go anywhere you wanted to. When I was born, though, it was right in the middle of World War II, and we were occupied by. So it was not a very good time to be born. So it was good that my parents were blessed with a little sunstroke like me. Just kidding. But you know what? What happened right after the Germans invaded Denmark on April? Princess Margrethe, who is now the Queen of Denmark, was born in April, I think April 16th. So right after the Germans invaded. So she was truly a ray of sunshine that came for the Danes. For 5 years, the Danes had to have blackouts, just like the other countries where they were at. So everything come down, and you basically had a curfew. But I'll get to a little more about that. My family consisted of my mom and my dad and an older sister, and the grandparents, both sides, and lots of aunts and uncles. And I grew up in a really close-knit, loving family. And it was very special. I think probably a lot of families were like that in Denmark. We got together with the family at least once a week. And I never smoked, but I think of all the secondhand smoke I got because they were all smokers. And the guys my father and my uncles, they would sit around and play cards, once a week, and I would money. and they were all just sitting there, puff, 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 puff. So Denmark is a democratic monarchy. Our Queen Margrethe, who is very well loved and liked by people in Denmark, she is very interested. She has a prime minister, and she's very interested in what's going on. She meets with the government or the leaders of the government weekly to see what's going on. So she's very much in on it. But I remember growing up, and she has a younger sisters. A middle sister was Bennett, younger was Anna Maria. And just growing up at the same time these princesses did, it was really fun. And we'd see pictures of them all the time, and some new clothes came in. And it was really, really a nice, a lot of fun as we grew up. Part of growing up in Denmark, as you grew up, was that you went to dancing school in the winter for 12 years in the winter and learned ballroom dancing. And I just love to dance. And this is a little aside, it kind of comes later. I want you to know, when we first met, he knew that I really, really loved to dance. And he even took dancing lessons, okay? He does not love to dance, okay? I guess it's one of those things that you find out after you're married. There are many, many political parties in Denmark. And if you can believe, now think of United States, we basically have two, plus the Green Party, and sometimes, another party will come up. In Denmark, in Denmark, there are 8 or 9, maybe sometimes even more now. But when I was growing up, it was 8 or 9. Do you have any idea how many now?
11,
15? 11?
Yeah.
Okay. So in order to form a government, they would form coalitions. Growing up, most of the time, it was the Social Democrats that were in power. But no matter what political party were in power at that time, Denmark is and was a socialized state, or a welfare state, with all the most positive things you can possibly think about. You're taken care of. A lot of people gave birth at home, but if you were born in the hospital, that was covered by the socialized medicine. All the way through school, that of course is covered by the state, including university education. So in other words, it doesn't matter how much your parents make or how much you make. If you have the brains and you want to go to the university, you have the opportunity to do so. So, and it's, in that way, I think it's very, very well done. While I'm on the education, you go to school, you started with first grade, I think they have kindergarten classes now, but when you're 7 years old. And for me, for example, I did not particularly like school, including my parents. Really good memory at that point anyway. So I could remember. So I would have my mom and dad read it out loud to me. And then the next day when the teacher called upon me to read out loud, I would just remember and recite what was on that page. Unfortunately, one day I was not paying attention and was talking to the person sitting beside me, and they skipped a page. So when it was my turn to read, somehow it did not quite come out right. But what it did is, and by that time I was already in 2nd grade, still didn't know how to read because I had dyslexia. So what it did, it made my teacher realize that I was dyslexic. And and she was really good. She was very good and took special interest in me and worked with me so that I did learn how to read, and I am an absolutely voracious reader. I spent a lot of my childhood in the library, just getting books and just sometimes sitting on the floor and reading. I still love to read. I mean, I just love it. Just about more than anything except my husband and my grandchildren, my children and my dogs, but it's right up there. So everything is taken care of basically from birth to death. Anytime you have to be in the hospital or anything in a nursing home, whatever it is covered. And obviously it's not free. You know, sometimes we'll say it's free. It is paid for through taxes, and taxes are high. And I know right now my nieces and nephews who are in Denmark, they probably pay about 60% of their income in taxes. And then on top of that is a 20% sales tax a month that they have to pay. 25% now, okay. So it is, but you know what? What's very interesting is that at least when I go home and visit, I've been back many, many, many times, and also that everyone is taken care of. So that's a really good part. You know, in Denmark, you don't get a baptism certificate like you do here. You get a christening certificate. So, and you don't have basically a name until you're christened. They will call you a little nickname. Like my nickname was Fia. And I hated that name because my family kept calling me that even as I was growing up. They'd call me Fia. So, and the Danish church is a Lutheran church, and it is a state church. So you're basically born into the church. In order not to be a member of the church, you have to write a letter saying you do not wish to be a member of the church. Most people who don't want to will maybe write and do that because you have to, of course, pay a church tax. That's part of it. And the pastor is a state official, or basically a government official, and was paid for all the way through. And so is the song leader, who in Denmark has a lot more responsibilities than, like, let's say, the worship leader has in this country. They talk to the family when somebody's going to be baptized. They do a lot of things within the church. He's also, or she, is also a government official and paid a good wage. Talking about wages, you know, the Danes, I believe that people who work at McDonald's make something like $15 an hour in Denmark. That's the last I heard. I didn't check with my sister just before I went. And the reason for that is that the Danish people feel, or the government feel, that the minimum wage should be a living wage. Okay. So no matter if you're working, you should be able to support your family. And most households, however, both parents work. And then they do have free childcare right from the beginning. What they have in Denmark, though, is that the mothers can basically take up, and if the father can also, sometimes they split it, so that, for example, the mother, they both really bond with their new child, and which I think is kind of neat. They also have, when a child is born, they will have a public health nurse that will go out to all the new mothers. Sometimes they will meet in little groups so they can discuss things that are, you know, the same concerns. They will have discussion groups. But the public health nurses come and weigh the babies, and they talk about if the baby is not eating well, if he or she is not nursing well. So they're right there with the children, with the mothers in their homes. So Denmark has, I believe it's the third lowest infant mortality rate. It's either the second or the third lowest infant mortality rate in the world, and that's with Norway and Holland. The three of them kind of sit right there, close together. And I believe United States is number 15. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So just to give you an idea about that. Also, you're confirmed through the Lutheran Church or the state church, if you so desire. And most people, young people, unfortunately, I know when I was confirmed at age 14, I was just so excited about this huge party I was going to have that it didn't mean a lot to me at that point. In my family went to church at all. But I, at age 8, had a real interest in going to church. So I'd go to church by myself, and I'd also go to what we call missionshuset on Wednesdays, which is a mission house, on Wednesday nights. And that went okay until my mother went with me one Wednesday and decided that she really did not think I needed to hear all that stuff about the fires of hell and everything else. So I couldn't go anymore through the church. So of course you would still do like you do here, go someplace and you pick up out a casket and all that. But you basically, the service is through the church. And what's interesting too, and this is from olden days, we have something that's called, all of a sudden, what is that called? The place, kapellet, the little chapel. And that's where people, after they have died, they will go there. And the undertaker will usually say some prayers and do a little service right there for the family. When my mom died, my sister decided that she said, oh, my sister will do this, which had no idea that this is what I was going to do. But anyway, I have a real strong faith. So she thinks that would just be perfect. And it was very, very. But that's I remember my mom, she was spent the last years in a nursing home. And of her own will, because I had said that I'd be happy to come back and take care of her. She struggled with emphysema, smoking. She smoked since she was 14 years old. And the last 10 years of her life were just awful. And she just, couldn't walk. Then when I would say, Mom, I think oxygen would do you a lot of good. And she'd go, I'm not going to have that until I really need it, I said, Mother, I think you need it. And the same thing, no way would she go in a wheelchair, because she wasn't going to do that until she needed it. And, but she was just the most wonderful lady. And I went back every year. It was really fortunate. Once Fred and I both got through school, made it a priority to go back and visit my family, my parents, my friends every year. And the last several years my mom was alive, I was able to go every 6 months. And that was very, very special, really very special. Well, I seem to have kind of gone back from I want to come back to during World War II, because I forgot to mention, we would listen to BBC at night, because I don't remember very much. My very first memory was that my parents turned up BBC really loud. We were at my grandparents', and they got so excited, and they were jumping around and clapping and hugging each other and crying and everything else, because I didn't know. Had just come through BBC was that this was on May 4th, 1945, that effective on May 5th, 1945, the Germans had capitulated in Denmark and Holland. Unfortunately, not in Norway yet. So we put lighted candles in the windows and basically just tore. I remember my dad just tearing down the blackout curtains. And then my parents being young, they were very young, they went out. I think that probably not even all the Germans had been, because they don't listen to the BBC. They had no idea what was going on. And some of the German soldiers got very frightened and started to shoot into the crowds. Oh. And so my grandparents took some of our big goose comforters, thank you, and they put them under the window and then put my sister and I behind that, thinking that if some stray bullets came in through the windows, they would be absorbed into the comforters. So anyway, and then I remember, that was my next memory, is that during the war, we didn't get any butter. That all went down to Germany, of course. And had gotten a hold of, by standing in line for hours, of half a pound of butter. And because I just heard they were all talking about how wonderful this was, and then they put it on the counter. So I took the butter and took it down on the floor and sat with a spoon, and every other bite for me and every other bite for our German Shepherd. And we finished that half a pound of butter in no time whatsoever. I don't remember, but I think my parents felt I probably needed the butter. So, and they thought it was a little humorous. They were also sad that they didn't get the butter. So, like I said before, my family was very close-knit, which I think is a wonderful thing as you grow up and to last you the rest of your life. And that is, I remember birthdays. They were very special. Because we start celebrating in the morning. Sure. So people either, like my parents would come and give me breakfast in bed most of the time, and presents right there in bed, or we would have it at the breakfast table. And a lot of my friends would do the same thing. So basically your birthday started, the celebration started the moment you opened your eyes that morning, and just went on the whole day. Because then after school, then I would have a party for my friends, and we would have, my mom would make these wonderful homemade boller, they're called. They're the type of roll that if you have ever been to Fastelavn or anything like that over at the Northwest Danish Society, Kaja makes those. So, and they're just wonderful. And then we would have a special birthday cake. This is called a brunsvigermand. And it was made like of a dough, the same, but it's a little sweeter than, but it's a bread dough, it's a yeast dough. And then melted brown sugar and butter on top, and it's baked. And then usually for the eyes and the mouth would be licorice, because the Danish love licorice in different colors. And then at night, my family would come over, my aunts and uncles and grandparents, and then again we'd have boller with butter, and then we'd have a layer cake with whipped cream in between and strawberries, whatever, because I was born on the 28th of June. So I got a lot of wonderful memories. Oh, and we would have hot chocolate with whipped cream. I mean, how is there anything better than that? And the holidays too were wonderful. And I know those of you who were here when we talked about Christmas. Christmas is very, very special in all the Scandinavian countries, with the lighted candles on the trees. And basically my parents would put it up, live candles. So the tree has to be really fresh so it doesn't burn down. And then we would dance or walk around the Christmas tree singing songs, and the very last one we would run one way and then run the other way. And with my dad, he just loved to just keep going and going and going. We'd just sing and tra-la-la-la-la, and we just kept, I remember growing up just looking at him and thinking, is he gonna do another one? And he always would. Sometimes in the presents that night, and then next day is called First Christmas Day. And you have the big smorgasbord, and with all the fish and all the open-faced sandwiches and everything, and it's just wonderful. And then everything when I was growing up, it may have changed by now, was that all the stores, they closed at noon on Christmas Eve. So everybody could come home and celebrate. Christmas Day, everything was closed. Movie theaters, everything. And then second Christmas Day is also a holiday. And that's when you would have opera premiere, ballet premieres, movie premiere, and all kinds of things. And you'd still eat, of course, and you get together. And then third Christmas Day, usually not a holiday, but we would usually go to dances, both third Christmas Day and sometimes fourth Christmas Day. And that's one thing you guys gotta change. Gotta have some longer Christmas holidays, you guys. And the same thing for Easter. We have Easter, and then second Easter Day. So, and the same thing for Pentecost. And then also the holiday is when Christ went, the Ascendant, day. So we had lots of holidays. We didn't have Thanksgiving, obviously. But in a way, in Denmark is the only country that celebrates the 4th of July outside the United States. Over on Rebild Bakker, and the Queen usually is always there. So that too is very special. It's usually they have Victor Borg was the speaker several times. So
what's the reason in Denmark, or is it the American?
It's just
for 4th of July that
Well, decided to get together to go over to Denmark and buy a piece of land so they could come back and celebrate the 4th of July.
Yeah.
They've done it every year except for the 5 years during the war they didn't come.
Yeah.
I have even been there, and there were 10,000 people showed up.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Queen was there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, the Denmark was a monarchy, and for many, many years, did you know it's the oldest monarchy in Europe? And our flag is the oldest flag also. But anyway, we came through, the Constitution was passed in 1849 on the 5th of June. And we still, that's a holiday also. And we do work in between too, I want you to know that. And also, there's 5 weeks vacation every year, usually 2 weeks in the winter and 3 weeks in the summer. And that's what most people start out with. Yeah. So my dad was an entrepreneur. I think he would have done marvelously over here. It was houses in Denmark at that time. He would succeed really well, and at times we were very wealthy, had living maids and everything else, and at times we'd be very poor. So it just kind of went up and down. The school system, did I talk about that? I didn't, did I? See, my memory isn't quite as good as it used to be.
You started kindergarten and didn't get much further.
I didn't get much further. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, you go through 5th grade, and at that time, and it's not that way any longer, I believe, but when I was going to school, in 5th grade, you had to take an exam. Yeah. And if you passed, you went into the academic line. If you failed, you basically went to 6th and 7th grade and then out. And you either got an apprenticeship, or you were out working on the farm, or you became a housemaid. So in 5th grade already, you were basically separated. And not everybody matures at that level.
You said this is the way it was then, but how
I'm trying to think also, do you remember when?
Now it's different. They go to the 9th grade.
Yeah, to the 9th.
9th grade. And if they're not quite sure what they want to do, they can take the 10th grade too. But usually from 9th grade, they go into the gymnasium if they want to do
right.
it. Otherwise, if they don't want to go to the gymnasium, they take the 10th grade and they go out and do something else.
Yeah.
Not becoming a maid, but something else.
Right. And I kind of knew that too, because my nieces and nephews, I have 2 nieces and a nephew. All 3 of them are engineers. The boy decided to go through 10th grade and then go through an apprenticeship as a trimmer. And nieces went through the university and became engineers. One is a construction engineer like their dad, and the other one is a chemical engineer. So, well, I'm looking at the time.
We're enjoying it.
Okay, don't worry about time. Okay.
You might mention, Fritse, that the 2 nieces became very good engineers, and one of them works for a very large pharmaceutical company. The other one has built 2 tunnels, one between the 2 islands in Denmark and the other one over to Sweden.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
charge of the groundwater.
In fact, my youngest niece was in charge of pumping out groundwater water from by the tunnel, and was in charge. Now she was right out of school, but she was in charge of French, English, American people that worked for her on that.
And Germans.
And Germans. And she was happy about that. No, just kidding. And of course, it was so safe in Denmark, and probably like it was safe in a small town in the 50s in the United States in the 60s. But I bicycled everywhere. and bicycle to school, back and forth every day. And that's when I got my first concussion, by the way, because it was raining. You know, it's always raining in Denmark. Not quite, but it's as bad as Oregon. So I had my head down, and I didn't even have my hands on the handlebar. I had them in my pocket because it was cold, and I was bicycling. I drove right into the back of a parked truck. So that was my first of several concussions, unfortunately. I was a swimmer, a competitive swimmer and a competitive diver. And as a competitive diver, I got quite a few concussions also. I just didn't know when to stop. But like I said, I wanted to be a nurse. And it was a dream of me. I really wanted to be a nurse and then go to Africa and other underdeveloped countries and work. I wanted to be a nurse missionary. That was my dream. And however, in order to do that in Denmark, you had to have practical work first. And that included being like a housemaid or a mother's helper for a year. And my sister also wanted to be a nurse, and she lasted as a housemaid or mother's helper for 2 weeks, and she decided that wasn't what she wanted. But again, that's what I wanted to do, and I spent 4 months on the island of Bornholm, which is a wonderful island, a wonderful place to go on vacation. It has its own culture that we could talk about too, around churches, which is very special to that. It's a vacation place, and my girlfriend and I from high school, we worked there for 4 months as maids, basically. We did I said I'll always make a fine scullery maid. And that I am. I'm good at doing dishes. I'm good at doing the vegetables and all that kind of stuff. But and then I was in a home with children, and then I had it all lined up. I wanted to go to New York as an au pair girl. I even had a position lined up. And my mom and dad, my mom said to me, you know, Fritse, I just know that if you go to New York, that you will meet an American and you'll fall in love, and you will move to New York. So please don't do that. So she said, we'll send you up to this International People's College instead. So, because I had skipped a year of, I go up to the International People's College, like Åsa was saying, and it was just a small liberal arts, political science college. We had 100 students from 15 different countries. It was just the most wonderful, wonderful thing. I remember one of our discussions around table was the centralization of the ashtray. I mean, we had some very, very, very important discussions. So we had some dear good. I met my husband on the very first day. You could hardly miss that. For one thing, I saw this really neat sports car. It was an Austin Healey Sprite, little white sports car. And to tell you, no young people, only the very, very wealthy young people had cars in Denmark at that point. And I had just gotten my driver's license because you had to be 18 in order to get your driver's license in Denmark. And it cost a lot of money. But my parents had promised, both my sister and I, that if we didn't smoke until we were 18, then they would buy us a driver's license. Then they figured by 18 we'd be smart enough not to start. Yeah. So my sister unfortunately started at 16, so she didn't get it. But so anyway, but I got mine. And he was asking me some questions, and I was answering back in my British English, which I had learned in school. And I couldn't understand his American English, and he couldn't understand mine. So we decided, we both spoke German, so we spoke German together for a while. And then we were there for 5 months. And at that point, it was very interesting because Fred thought he might want to be a diplomat or something like that, but he wasn't sure. So anyway, I started nursing school in Odense, my hometown. Fred went on to another high school, or Folkehøjskole they're called, which is kind of after school you can go, and was there learning Danish. He was there for 4 months and learning Danish. And then he went on to the University of Aarhus, and like Åsa said, in medical school. And the only reason he was allowed to enter the medical school was that they thought he was Norwegian. The way he spoke Danish with this very charming accent, they thought he was Norwegian. So anyway, they found out that he was American, and they said, we're really sorry, but at that point they only had 2 medical schools in Denmark, and they allowed 5 students from each of the Nordic countries to come, but they simply didn't have room for anybody else. Now remember again, for that 1 year, he paid no tuition. So, and they have 7 years of medical school over there rather than the pre-med and med like we do here. But like I said, I started nursing school and really just loved it. In Denmark, the program was a diploma program. Like the diploma program you had over here was 3.5 years long. And he said, well, you know, it takes a real long time. And I said, well, so what? If that's what you want to do, do it. So he became a doctor. But so he went back, though, because he had contacted some universities, some medical schools in the United States, and they said, you know, if you want to get into medical school, then you need to come back here and finish up your pre-med and then apply to medical school. So he came back and said, you know what, we have to go to the United States. Yeah. And I said, well, you know what, I'm going to stay until I finish my education. And no wonder our kids are both stubborn, because my husband said, no, I'm not leaving until you go with me. So he said, if I have to work over here for 2.5 years until you're done, so be it. So anyway, we decided that we were going to get married. And by that time, we had known each other 19 months and gotten a little older. We got married in an 1800-year-old castle church, Bra Trolleborg, which was very special. It was on March 24th, 1962, and there was snow everywhere. And I just remember standing, you know, out what we call the weapon house, which is when you go into the church, again in the olden days when everybody had their swords and all their weapons. This place, you were to leave your weapons before you actually went into the church proper. So my father and I were standing out there in Våbenhuset, and I was just, my teeth were chattering and everything else, I was shaking, and he said, you know what, Fritse, if this doesn't work out, you just let me know and I'll send you a ticket to come home. So anyway, that's the way we started our marriage. So we went by boat. I mean, and I just remember my poor mother, they were down there, you know, of course at the pier waving goodbye to us. And then my dad decides to drive up along the coast so they can see the boat. And they kept waving and waving and waving, and we kept waving and waving and waving. It was a very, very long goodbye. But we had a wonderful trip across the ocean. It took us 10 days. My poor husband was so seasick until some real wonderful Danish young girls, they said, you know what? You just need to have a little buzz on all the time, and you won't feel it. So, and you know what? They were right. So he would start out with a Bloody Mary in the morning, and he would just be happier, and he danced. He danced every night. So we landed in New York, and just like all the immigrants used to do, we didn't have to go through Ellis Island. But, and we had the little sports car, of course, along. We drove all the way across country in his little Austin Healey Sprite. And in New York, by the way, we got hung up on a manhole. There, we had to have 4 big guys come and lift the car off so we could drive on. We are low to the ground. We drove across country, and you know, it was, of course, just beautiful. But I tend to get real sleepy. And my husband tells me that when we drove across Nebraska, that I only woke up twice, and that's when he turned one way, and the other time when he turned the other way. And I said, do you have to turn all the time? So anyway, in the United States, I could not start the diploma program because at that time they did not allow married students in the program. And you know, that was truly, truly a blessing in disguise, warrior program. So I spent a year at Lewis and Clark doing pre-nursing, and then 3.5 years at the School of Nursing, University of Oregon School of Nursing, now the Oregon Health Science University. And my husband got admitted there. He had to do 2 more years of pre-med, and then went to medical school for 4 years. So between us, as a married couple, we have 6 years of college and medical school. So, and we were obviously quite poor. Right after, basically, knew that if we were hungry, we could always go out to the Volbex and get a meal. So they had 5 kids, the youngest just in diapers when we met, and the oldest just 4 years, I think 5 years younger than me. So they have been just absolutely wonderful to us. I did, the first year at Lewis and Clark was kind of hard. You know, you come in and you put full-time study into college and in another language. And I remember getting my American literature and my English literature papers back saying, British spelling, British spelling, British spelling, because, you know, I write color with C-O-L-O-U-R. So, but I loved literature, and I almost thought of changing my major for a while there. But what was neat is Fred and I had a lot of the same professors, and when I would write a paper, I would take just one little, maybe even just a paragraph or 1 page, and then expound 20 pages on this. You see, that's why I can talk real well, right? and did well. Fred would do more like a book report. So I'd get A's on my papers, and his first paper he got a D-. And he simply could not, you know, all the sciences he had A's, but he could not have papers like that or grades like that. So what we did, he typed all of my papers for me throughout school. I didn't know how to type. I wrote his papers for him. I said, but he read them. He was very. He read the books, and I said, well, tell me about. Take one part of it again and do the same thing. So I think, did you get a B or an A out of those?
I got a B.
Yeah. So, and by the way, this is really kind of funny because it's so typical, different between Denmark and America, is that I was nominated to be Student Nurse of the Year by my instructors my senior year. Well, I didn't, there was just 5 of us out of a class of 110, and you had to be in the top 10 and stuff like that. But anyway, I didn't know that you're supposed to stand up and give a talk about yourself and talk yourself up. So I was the first one to do it. So I just kind of talked a little bit about myself, and then the other 4 came, and, you know, they expounded on all these wonderful things they had done and blah, 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 blah. So I did not become the Student Nurse of the Year that year. But I felt it was an honor anyway. Well, Fred, we waited 6 years to have our first child because we really wanted to get through school. But then and when we had our second child was when Fred was an intern. He graduated from med school in '68, and then after he had finished his internship, he got drafted. Now this was during during Vietnam. So, and Fred and I were some of those out there with signs, you know, anti-Vietnam. So we obviously were hoping and praying that he would not have to go to Vietnam. It ended up that his mom's, who had graduated from high school in Haines, Alaska, there were 2 in her graduating class, and the second half of her class was the commanding officer of the armed forces in Germany. So guess where we got to go? Yes, we got to go to Germany, and it was just, you know, it was so great because we spent 6 months in Texas too, which I loved, warm. And so we moved to Germany then with a 2-year-old, and by that time a 9-year-old. 9-month-old, yeah, sure, yeah, okay. So, and those 3 years in Germany were one. But when we first drove up there from, Fred was stationed at Ramstein Air Base, his missile battalion was protecting the air base. So the first time we drove up, it took us 14 hours with our German Shepherd and our 2 kids and all these potty breaks and whatever. We finally got it down to 10 hours. And they come in there and they change the tires and they do everything else. That's what we would do at the stops, change tires, do everything else. So we were really, really, really very good. And it was neat that my kids got to know my parents and all of my family, and especially because my dad had a heart attack at 54 and died soon after we went back to the United States. So it was very special time for us. I didn't work while the kids were little and while we were in Germany. But I did a volunteer study for the public health department to prove the need for more public health nurses in the armed services, and I did prove that. I want to just backtrack a little bit because I graduated in '66. So in those 2 years, I went directly into public health and became a public health nurse. And then, as Medicare came through in 1967, I was the first nurse discharge planner up at the medical school hospital and set up that program and wrote the outline and coordinated everything. So that was very, very challenging for me. And then, like I said, in Germany, it was great. We had money for the first time. Fred was drafted as a captain, and we had base housing. It was really, really good. We did a lot of traveling, and we lived out what we call in the economy. We lived in a little German village called Steinwenten. Grew up speaking English, and Lisa, our oldest, both High German and Low German. Our son grew up speaking English and Low German. That's it. And I still remember him coming. There were farms right next to us. He would come down to the neighbor. He says, "I want to see the pigs." And this is a little guy, 2 years old, so he got to see the pigs. So when we came home, I went back into public health, but only wanted to work part-time. There were lots and lots of opportunities for wonderful jobs that I turned down because I felt it was really important that I spend some time with my kids. I worked 3 days a week, but had then the rest with my kids. And one of the positions probably one of the best positions I've ever had, I was the perinatal coordinator up at the medical school hospital, and I coordinated 7 satellite clinics of high-risk clinics all over Oregon. And then I taught Lamaze. I taught Lamaze for 12 years, by the way, like in the evenings and stuff. And I taught baby care classes to the new mothers. And also the pediatric residents had to rotate through my classes too. And then I taught breastfeeding to mothers because a lot of these mothers, their mothers had bottle fed. And so I was teaching a lot of these young mothers how to breastfeed. And the OB residents and all the nursing students rotated through those. Basically, I went and talked to them about that. So I guess I was one of the very first lactation experts too. But I nursed my own babies. Did you know, by the way, if you have somebody that's thinking about that when my youngest, when I was nursing him, I was eating 5,000 calories a day, and I was losing a pound a week. Yeah, it's wonderful way to eat. I had chocolate every day. Now I just dream about chocolate every day. So, and then I by somehow I got into home health. I think the reason I got into home health, I'll just do a little aside, was that our daughter was hit by a car when she was 12 in 1980, and I wanted to be available to be home, so I quit the job that I had, and then was home for 6 months, and then went back part-time in home health, where I had a lot more free time. But one day, they needed help in hospice, and I went there and spent a couple of days, and it's like somebody just hit me, or like lightning happened, and I knew that's where I was supposed to be. So I've been a hospice nurse ever since, and ever since 1985. So 23 years, and I absolutely love it. I feel all my patients their families and friends, they have given me so much over the last 23 years that I couldn't have gotten from anyone else. Because, you know, no one allows you that close unless they're going through a really, really hard time. And this is about the most difficult time of anybody. This is the most difficult time of anybody's life. But you know what's interesting? People will say, well, how can you do that? It's got to just be so depressing. Well, you know what? It's not depressing, because I think it's uplifting in some ways. Sure, it's sad. And sure, I've spent hours crying with people and hours crying. But the thing that really sold me on it was I came out to see a 34-year-old lady who was dying of breast cancer. She already had metastases to her bone, everything. She had a fracture, so she was even in one of those, with a thing going all the way through here, and she was just lying in bed. But what was the saddest was that she was totally out of it, because her doctor could not control her pain. Well, I looked at her and she was taking 34 different pain pills a day, and she was just out of it, you know. So I called the doctor and I said, you know, could I start a morphine pump on this lady, and may I also start her on an anti-inflammatory, just like plain old Motrin? And he said, sure, but he said, she doesn't have a central line put in. So in other words, she didn't have something I could just plug in and give it IV. And I said, no, but I can give it through her tummy. And he said, you know what, why don't you write whatever you want me to sign and fax it to me, and I'll fax it back. And in 48 hours, that lady was pain-free and was alert. And that, every time I got to the point, I thought, I just can't handle this anymore. I'd think of that. I thought, you know, yes. And she had two small kids, a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. But she was able to spend some real quality time. She lived for another 6 months, and the time that she had was a good time, as good as it could possibly be. So that's basically, and you wouldn't believe it, but you won't know how much laughter we have with our patients and their families. We do. Because, you know, we come in there and we say, we're not here to talk to you every day about death and dying. We are in here to help you live to the fullest, however much time you have left. I even remember one patient we came to admit, the social worker and I would go out together, and they were talking about how much they love to dance. And then I said, oh, I love to dance too. And the wife went over and sat by the piano, and she started playing, and the patient went like this, and he and I waltzed around the kitchen. So it's very different from other kinds of nursing. Okay, I'm now only working 3 to 5 shifts a month, so I'm basically very, very, very semi-retired, and I just can't quite let it go. And I decided to take Social Security a little early a year ago, because I just couldn't say no when my supervisor would call me. She'd say, oh, Fritse, please, 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 we need somebody to work. So I started that, and then I called her up and I said, guess what? I said, I cannot work any more than 3 days a month, or I make too much money. And so anyway, that's how it started. And now I can make more money. But anyway, and you know, to stay real physically and emotionally healthy through all of this, and through being married to Fred. I'm very physically active. I hike, and to celebrate when I turned 60, I climbed South Sisters. I'll never do it again, but I did stand on top. I had not backpacked for 15 years. No, I had not backpacked since I was 15, a little longer than that. And I had not slept in a tent. As far as I'm concerned, camping is with a shower and a flush toilet. So anyway, but we did that. I also ski, both cross country and downhill. I even went scuba diving for a little bit because Fred loves it so much. And I played soccer for 15 years until I was 48. So, and I love to eat. But that's sort of how you have to do something to cope with the emotional draining and rewarding work you have. I The only other thing I just want to say that 6 years, and we always discuss the similarities, and the difference between United States and America. There are an awful lot of similarities, I feel. The differences are, I believe, is that political discussions in Denmark is a national sport. And I grew up with that. So it's very hard sometimes when some of my friends don't want to discuss it, or even my own daughter doesn't want to discuss it because we don't think the same way, because they get too upset. You know, Danes, we get upset and we might even shout at each other, but that doesn't mean that we aren't friends the moment we are done discussing politics. So, it's, you know, as to immigrating, I never really had a desire to leave Denmark. I wanted to travel all over the world, yes, but I didn't have a desire to immigrate to another country, except when I met Fred. So I came over obviously on a green card and became a citizen the year I graduated from college in 1966. And I think the thing that is different here is that an old lady it wouldn't have been okay for her to play soccer in Denmark. One of the Danish au pair girls told me that, and one of my friends had a Danish au pair girl every year, and she said, you know, in Denmark, old ladies don't play soccer. Now, I was only 47, so I was not an old lady. But anyway, I think, but the nature over here, I just love. I think that I'm so excited to live in Oregon and have traveled as much as we have. And that's about it. If anybody have questions, please ask. Okay.
Why did you choose Oregon and not Alaska?
No medical school in Alaska.
Oh, it's because of medical school you came here. Okay.
Yeah. And then, like I said, we met Erik and Kaya. How could we ever move?
Okay.
So we came back here. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about school grades and
Per class?
teachers and
Yeah, we were probably, in my classes, we were probably about 20 students, sometimes fewer. I lived in Odense most of my life as I was growing up, but I also lived in 2 small villages. So I had some wonderful experience too. And in some of those, there were only 15 students. So I think, you know, I really, really feel for the kids today that have those huge classes of 30. Feel for the teachers.
were you
But
all one class, or was it many classes in one room?
oh no, a different room for every class.
It's not a one school.
No, that's what I mean. The grade schools are very much like here, except our class sizes were smaller.
There's one big difference, which is that in Denmark, you stay with the same student.
That is a big, and it's if you have a good teacher, that's wonderful. If you have somebody you don't like, that's not so wonderful. But like I said, I was blessed by having a teacher that really took an interest because of my dyslexia. That could have really made a difference which direction I went. Yes.
What was your greatest challenge as
As
an immigrant?
an immigrant, probably being away from my family. My biggest, especially my parents. I was really, really homesick. Really homesick. That first Christmas was really tough. My husband's parents, so we were called up there and say they are Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus, and they sent both my husband's sister and he and I tickets to come to Alaska for Christmas. And that helped to be with family. But other than that, every Christmas we have spent with the Volbecs, and that helped because they also celebrated Danish Christmas. But that was my biggest challenge, I would think. I mean, school in a little bit, but not that much. I've always loved school. So, and especially, I don't think I loved school as much in Denmark as I did over here. I really, really loved it. And I was on my route to get my master's in nursing when our daughter was hit by the car. And then, that took, and that's the way it was supposed to be, Yes?
How is your daughter now?
Our daughter is doing well. Yes. She went through 29 surgeries, 19 during junior high and high school, but she's doing well. Still has a very misshapen leg, but she can walk, She has to wear support hose for the rest of her life because her lymphatic system was wiped out. But you know, she's doing well. She has 2 kids and a great husband. Yes?
You know, in America, we have a separation of church and state according to our Constitution, and theoretically anyway. And in Denmark, you have the Lutheran Church as part of the state.
Yes.
Does that affect politics in any way, or?
You know what, let me say this about that. When I was growing up, and I was going to call my niece or my sister and get the latest stats, but 96% of people went to church. I mean, 96% belong to folk church, or the Folkechurch, we call it, or the state church. And now, but only 3% went to church. So no.
Doesn't.
Yeah, it was very interesting. One of the times I was visiting in Denmark, we had been invited over to some of my niece's friends. And first the hostess said something like, well, nobody has those blue plates anymore, you know, the Christmas plates. And I put up my hand, I said, well, we do. Okay, and then later, probably an hour or 2 later, she says something, well, nobody believes in God anymore. And I said, I do. You know, so it was just kind of interesting. Yes?
What's the foreign language instruction like in Danish schools?
Well, when I was growing up, required was 5 years of English, 4 years of German, 2 years of Swedish, and 1 year of French.
Wow.
And that was required. I'm sure it's just as much now. I think they even started earlier. We started in 5th grade.
And it's very thorough. It's very thorough.
Yes.
Here's very lax. My children took foreign language in school, and when they came home, it was absolutely terrible. But in Denmark, it's much tougher.
Well, yeah. I mean, otherwise, I think it would have been very difficult to go in full time. And I took a full load, right away. But yes, that was good. And also, I happened to be married. I mean, one of my friends' mother was British. So even way before that, she would teach a couple of friends and her daughter English. And we would, once a week, we'd go there and we'd have tea, high tea, and then learn English. Yeah. Any other questions?
What did you have for breakfast? What did you take?
Oh,
That's important.
yes, and it is.
Your lunch, did you carry your lunch?
Yes, thank you. And that's so different. Thank you for bringing that up. For breakfast, we always had rolls with butter and cheese and marmalade. And, we put the marmalade on top of the...
Rye bread also.
Rye bread. Yes. And sometimes we'd have basically raw oatmeal. That was, you just took the raw oatmeal, and that would be in with milk, and that would be your breakfast. So none of these sweetened type stuff. They have them now in Denmark also. Yeah. And then for lunch, bring our lunch every day, and we'd have a little, what we called in madkasse, which was just a little square box, because it had to fit the rye bread, which is square. And you would usually have one piece with one slice with the leverpostej, and it would usually be like fat under it, like goose fat, goose lard, something like that. And then, it was wonderful. Now I'm a vegetarian now, so I don't eat any of this stuff anymore. And then liver pate, and usually with a little bit of red cabbage or something else on it, and usually a piece with egg and a piece with tomatoes, or something like that. That was our lunch.
In Sweden, they celebrate in the fall with Morten's Ghost.
Oh, yes, we did in
yeah.
Denmark too, Morten's Ghost, which, and I can't remember, that's basically, Morten is, I think, a martyr.
November, I think.
Yeah, was it in November? Anybody that's,
October, November.
I think it's in October.
Yeah.
October.
Yeah,
No,
right.
it's in November.
Is it in November?
Okay.
Sorry.
It's 11th.
And then you have the goose. But I don't remember much about Morten's Aften, so if anybody else, I guess we didn't celebrate a lot in my home.
The legend is that he was a bishop.
Yes.
And at the time when they changed to the Reformation, he was bleeding. And he went into a place where they have geese, and they betrayed him. So
Oh.
that's why we have the goose now. We kill the goose. And
Oh, instead of the bishop. Huh?
Or is it Goose's fault?
Yes, it was the goose's fault.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions.
One final aside, speaking about the language teaching, when Fritse was growing up, they generally either allowed English or American English. And nowadays, a lot of people are taught the American English. But I had a unique opportunity at the University of Aarhus in that I spent quite a few evenings with the lady who became Queen of Denmark, helping her with her American English.
They were in a study. They took philosophy together, so
She was one of my classmates.
so they were in a study group together.
You know, Fritse,
Yes.
in Sweden they celebrate with a little bit of aquavit, but it's Oldborg, and it's come from Denmark.
Aalborg, but it has to be the jubileums. It has to be the
Yes.
white
Yeah.
one.
Yes.
As far as, and that's what we do, with our open face sandwich parties. And Fred and I have sold many of them on auctions for hospice. And one year, one son of one of my patients flew up from California, and then the other son who lived locally, they bid $1,000 to come and eat dinner at our house for hospice. So we have done that several times, but it's true. You have to sit there and you say skål, and it has to be ice cold. When we were entertaining Americans, we would just have a couple during the hearing, and then we'd always we still do, and we just put it away, because if you left it out, some people don't know when to stop, and it is strong stuff. It's 80 proof. All right.
Okay, one more question.
What did you wear to school?
Hmm?
What did you wear to school?
Anything.
Anything. No.
Pants?
Yeah,
Dresses in the
but
beginning,
dresses
you
in the
always-
beginning, but then you could basically, in the winter, you wore pants.
No uniforms?
No uniforms, no.
But you could wear pants when you were.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
No, where? It's this one here. Here. This one.
Yeah,
This one here.
yeah. So
Well,
anyway,
Fritse, this was a wonderful presentation. You're a wonderful storyteller, and you weave it so beautifully with great enthusiasm and humor. So let's give it a